Look at that pig stuffing his face with donuts on my time! That's right. Keep eating. Little do you know you're drawing ever closer to the poisoned donut. There is a poisoned one, isn't there, Smithers?
No, sir. I discussed this with our lawyers. They consider it murder.
Damn their oily hides!
By far, one of the most polarizing game series I've ever dealt with is Overwatch. I went from dismissing it as a poor attempt at replacing Team Fortress 2 at launch, to realizing it was deeper than that, to getting insanely addicted and having a dedicated friend group that I played with, to dropping it entirely for about 3 years, to coming back in full force with the excitement of the release of Overwatch 2, only to find a game that, while still an absolute blast to play, still fills me with endless waves of frustration. It has potential, a spark of ingenuity that is being crushed under the weight of its parent company's transgressions, and an ever-changing market for shooters, to a point that I'm conflicted on whether or not to say it's one of my favorite games of all time, or if it would be better off dead and buried. But there's a solid ground to work from, and given the right improvements, a more developer-friendly environment, and a more consumer-friendly economy, it could rise from the ashes of the smoldering dumpster fire that is Activision-Blizzard into being the glorious phoenix it always wanted to be. And I'll admit, the buyout by Microsoft has given me at least some light optimism that maybe they'll force Activision to get their act together. But even if that's the case, it still doesn't fix the fundamental flaws that are plaguing Overwatch 2. So I've come up with some ideas that, in my humble opinion, could help bring Overwatch back into the big leagues again. To make for a more interesting video, I've decided I don't want to touch the topics of the overpriced cosmetics, and the fact that we're not getting the full PvE experience we were promised, though these topics may get brought up in support for other points. So, let's start with the biggest problem.
$900 he does!
I think the first and most obvious of the fundamental flaws with the way Blizzard treats Overwatch is their insistence on it being first and foremost an esports experience, which, frankly speaking, is the absolute dumbest idea they could have gone with. Esports, and the people interested in them, are a minute percentage of the gaming community. 9 times out of 10, people would rather play the game than watch someone else do it, and unlike in traditional sports, where it requires constant bodily upkeep, anyone can pick up a controller or use a keyboard and start playing, especially considering the game's already gone free-to-play, which, even I'll admit, was a good first step towards making it more approachable to the casual consumer. But going back to my original point, the hardcore audience who play esports aren't the people monetarily supporting it, as they're here almost purely for the game's mechanics, whereas the casual audience casts such a large net. The people here for a team-based game to play with friends, the lore enthusiasts, the people who love the art style and character design, they're the ones more likely to stick with the game, as they're never going to reach the absolute skill ceiling of the big leagues, and are thus more likely to keep practicing and keep the game alive. Secondly, trying to run esports is expensive. Renting out venues, paying the players, booking the hotels, advertising, not even mentioning the cash prizes themselves, that doesn't come cheap. And with the game and Activision's increasingly negative public perception, the Overwatch League has been progressively losing more and more money and steam with each passing year. I think a complete reset is all that can really save this one. A competitive community is more appealing to the casual viewer when it started from the grassroots of the community. Just look at Smash Bros. Melee's crowd, still alive and kicking 2 decades after the game launched. And yeah, it's not got the same millions of dollars on the line, but it's much more approachable. These people came from nothing, so why can't I? That mindset breeds more confidence and interest than booking a full team of athletes that are from somewhere else to come represent your city. And speaking of Smash, there's also the fact that Overwatch, in my opinion, is much less interesting to watch than a fighting game is. Yes, there's still fundamentals and a game flow to keep track of, but the amount of technical skill is just completely different. In Street Fighter, for example, Not only do you have to manage your character's position, health, and drive gauge, but you also need to remember 10 to 15 complex inputs per character with classic controls, be able to technically execute them in less than a second, and in the middle of doing something else entirely. Yes, APM is just as important to shooters, but with each character there's only so many options you have, and the animations are infinitely less hype and flashy due to being from a first-person perspective 90% of the time. Compare a complex combo string in a fighting game, or even in Smash, to the hype of an ultimate in Overwatch, and the difference is night and day. The ult is really the only way to get to be flashy and exciting for most characters on Overwatch's roster, which leads to an ultimately less satisfying game to watch. The game feel is half of what makes Overwatch interesting, and you just don't get that when you're not playing.
Wait, don't be fooled! She's just a regular Soldier 76? Stupid cheap hat! She still embodies all the awful stereotypes she did before!
But she's got a new hat.
One of the more interesting things that sets Overwatch's roster apart from other contemporaries in the shooter genre, including its most direct comparison, Team Fortress 2, is the uniqueness of each character, both from a lore and from a gameplay perspective. TF2's Mercs or Call of Duty's Nameless Soldiers just don't have the kind of synergy between personality and playstyle that Overwatch's diverse cast do. And this is definitely needed, as both map and game design between Overwatch and its contemporaries are vastly different, with Overwatch taking a stance that teamwork really matters. Fights are won or lost based on how in sync everyone is with their abilities and their team, and usually that means teams need to be grouped up together to push an objective or when dueling the other team, and most characters in the game function well in this environment while maintaining the integral playstyle that suits their character and personality. With the exception of 3 off the top of my head: Symmetra, Sojourn, and Widowmaker. I'm going to offer some ideas on how to improve each character. Starting with Sojourn, she has 2 glaring issues. The first is that she's just a more mobile Soldier 76 with a dash of Widowmaker in there for good measure. And the second is that, well, frankly, she has the personality of a 2x4 plank of wood. The latter is a writing issue that I don't really have anything that I can do about, but the former is pretty simple. Rework her kit in order to make her still a threat without pushing her back to launch state, and while making her more distinct from being the same run-and-gun shooter protagonist as Jack. First, her primary fire can stay the same, except she no longer gains charge for the railgun off of players or shields. Instead, her alt fire stops momentum immediately, but is a more powerful projectile than her current railgun, and since it immediately cancels your momentum, that means you can slide cancel. You get 1 railgun shot per clip, meaning you have to reload in order to snipe again, but you can access it without needing to charge up first. Overclock can stay the same, as can the slide. I don't really know what the point of the disruptor shot field is, as it's kinda just more annoying to take minor chip damage walking through it, and very rarely is ever the reason she wins a fight. Instead, let's work in some of her lore. Most of Sojourn's body is cybernetic, so let's go all in on that. Let her be the ultimate Batman-esque hybrid character, making her a jack of all trades that she should have always been. She'll have abilities that will let her work as the other roles temporarily, becoming a pseudo-tank or pseudo-support. She has 2 new abilities, one of which will replace Disruptor Shot, Med Mist Cloud. She fires a projectile that explodes on impact with the ground or a player model. It shatters, dealing no damage, but releasing a cloud of healing mist that heals 20 damage per second to every allied player in the area of effect for a total of 5 seconds, making a total of 100 healing. This is intended as a last stand heal or a quick pick-me-up after a fight when one or both of your healers are down. Her other new ability is Adaptive Nanite Armor, which functions similarly to Wrecking Ball's Adaptive Shield, as it covers her player model in a team-colored nanite mesh, granting her 250 temporary shield health, which begins to regenerate after 2 seconds of taking no damage, and lasts for a total of 13 seconds. This turns her into a temporary mini-tank in order to try and make up for your tank dying, but it does not begin cooldown until shield health is depleted or until it expires, after which it goes on a 13-second cooldown and her rate of fire is reduced for the next 3 seconds, as well as disabling the slide for 1.5 seconds, meaning you have a window of opportunity in which she is much easier to take out if you weathered the storm. Sojourn is supposed to be the hero of Toronto, and allegedly the sole savior of potentially hundreds of civilians during the second Omnic crisis, so why not turn her into the cyborg superhero designed with the intent of being a rescuer, blocking damage with bulk for the innocent, healing the injured, and fighting back against the attacker. That's our new and improved Sojourn.
Here's Homer. Here's Homer too. That's also Homer. That's Homer.
Then there's Widowmaker. Her issues lie in, frankly, her lack of creativity in comparison to her fellow heroes. She's more approachable to players coming in from other games where sniping is a focus, but the game design of Overwatch doesn't really need snipers. She's the ultimate glass cannon. On the map she's effective with a good Widow, she dominates the whole game, creating an unfun experience for anyone who has to deal with her. No one likes getting killed from across the map with an opponent they didn't know was there and had no chance to fight back against or even react to. On the other hand, on the maps she's bad on, or with a really bad Widow, you might as well be playing with only 3 other players, because when she's not dead, she'll miss every shot she takes. I propose a change that makes her a more generalist character, that would allow her to have more of an impact on the actual team fight, rather than running off to a hidey hole and picking off strays running back from spawn while her team loses the fight on the point. Widowmaker's lore had her become a sleeper agent and master assassin with Talon, and has an affinity for poison, as well as being someone who equips herself for whatever the job she needs. So let's focus in on those aspects. In order to actually snipe traditionally, she'll need to charge for double her current time, and at full charge, she actually gets a damage reduction on body shots. But as a trade-off, she now has extra tools at her disposal in order to combat some of her weaknesses. Her body shot rounds now have the effect of her Venom Mine, dealing light poison damage over time and marking her opponent's position to herself for a limited time, and after a few seconds, if that opponent comes into direct physical contact with another player on their team, they are infected with the poison for the same duration, and take half the poison damage normally dealt, allowing not only for her to keep following her current prey, but to report to her team enemy positions via pinging or by chat. She keeps her grappling hook and the Venom Mine, which have the same venom effects as her rounds, but the Widow's Kiss loses half of its AR rounds. Instead, she's given a melee weapon, a toxic dagger, like Junker Queen's Jagged Blade. Its range is short, but it provides the same benefits as her toxic rounds, and has a slightly faster swing speed than most melees. It doesn't have to reload, and provides a light 2-second slowdown to a target attacking her in melee range, which resets with each consecutive melee hit. These 2 simple changes allow her to affect the team fight more directly, and allow her to challenge people attempting to assassinate her, while reducing the amount of BS deaths and her dominance on certain maps. It makes her more of a team player, which, shocking, is kind of the point of playing Overwatch.
Nettie? Nettie!
He's cheating on us! I'm scared! Come on, Matt, move this thing!
I can't! It's a Geo!
Then there's Symmetra, a character that I've really grown to despise as they've continued to change her, and as a character fundamentally fails to represent herself properly through gameplay. In lore, Symmetra is an architect with a perfectionist streak who wants to create order and harmony, and her current playstyle is to cause as much obnoxious chaos as possible and WM1 like a cracked out Phlogistinator Pyro in Team Fortress 2. Outside of her turrets, there's nothing about her architect background at all. Instead of this, I think we can change her to be more in line with the Symmetra of lore by turning her closer to her team-oriented playstyle of old, but still producing new abilities for her to take advantage of. Firstly, and I'm not even joking, letting her have an inventory of 3 hard light walls and ramps that she can place on the map just like in Fortnite's build mode. And these walls, while being translucent, are still walls with health totals, not like Ryan's shield. You cannot walk through them, they have to either expire or be destroyed. She can also build ramps in order to funnel her team to high ground if her teleporter is on cooldown. Her turrets no longer deal damage or slow targets. Instead, they're surveillance turrets, which alert her entire team whenever movement is detected in their presence, marking them like Hanzo's sonic arrow, which honestly could also be replaced, but that's not something I'm going to talk about here. Her primary fire is also in need of a retool in addition to her current kit. I actually think her range could be increased for the beam, and I think it would be very cool to allow her to reflect the beam off of her built walls, allowing her to safely attack enemies without getting in line of sight, maybe even allow her balls to do the same, like a physics puzzle in Portal. The trade-off, of course, is that it would no longer ramp up the damage she fires. She no longer has to get close, so naturally she doesn't get a high reward option just for pressing M1 down. Lastly, her ultimate is quite honestly the lamest one in the whole game, and almost seems like a placeholder tool. You can create anything with hard light and cannon, and your ultimate ability is to summon the weakest Spider-Man villain. Yeah, we're changing that. Her new ultimate is called Font of Inspiration. It creates a large statue that gives a 15% speed buff, plus 50 armor health, that regenerates, and a 1.5 times damage multiplier to all allies within range for the duration, though it can be destroyed, having roughly the same health as Lifeweaver's Tree of Life. It provides miniature versions of Lucio, Brigitte, and Mercy's respective abilities all temporarily, providing more versatility than the raw damage buff Orisa's old ultimate used, which feels more on point for Sim. This turns Symmetra into the ultimate support specialist without needing to be a dedicated healer, and still allows her to deal consistent damage.
Now to soothe my head with an evening at Ford's Theater. Oh no! John Wilkes Booth!
I've got you in my sights.
Good mix, just Arthur. Unhand me, Yankee.
And speaking of specialist, I used that term for a reason. My next proposed change is in regards to terminology. New players, when getting to the character selection screen for the first time, are overloaded with options regardless of their role, and in order to look at a character's strengths and abilities, you have to go to a completely different menu. I propose the left side of the screen be used to showcase the pros and cons of your highlighted hero, a sub-menu explaining your abilities, and an explanation on how they work, and use the old difficulty rating system of stars to explain which ones have a higher skill ceiling, maybe even with a recommended tab for beginners, or that changes to heroes who synergize well with your team's choices. This would help make things more approachable for everyone on the team and can help players choose a team that would work together well. Then there's the fact that the categories of hero, tank, healer, and damage aren't all entirely accurate and are too simplified, especially when hybrid characters do exist. Damage honestly isn't even the greatest name for the roster of heroes in that lineup. Many of them, such as Symmetra and Mei, have low primary damage and are chosen usually for their utility and not their raw numbers. I think that Specialist is a far more fitting name for this lineup, as while every healer does have healing capabilities and every tank is capable of dealing damage, every hero is a damage hero if you play them like one. Instead, each damage hero has a unique playstyle that specializes in one or two aspects. For example, Reaper is something of a tank buster, and Genji and Tracer are backline harassers, designed to pick off weaker characters. Symmetra, with our supposed changes, would be all about team support and map control, while Junkrat and Pharah are all about burst and splash damage. There are just too many types of characters in this category to just call it damage. I mentioned earlier there are hybrid characters, though they fall into the same niche, healer and damage hybrid. Zenyatta, Illari, Kiriko, some might even include Moira, are all designed to be able to dish out the pain as well as take it away. I think it's kind of silly that that's the case. We don't really need a tank and damage hybrid, as most of the tanks are theoretically doing that already. As a tank main, I routinely stop the scoreboard with 5,000 to 10,000 more damage than the actual damage players. But a tank and healer hybrid could be pretty cool, and there's even a character in the lore who would work perfectly for this. His name is Overlord, and he's part of D.Va's mecha squad. His role in the squad is the Repairman. He could have a weaker damage output and worse mobility than the team leader, but could maybe apply repair drones to his allies to do healing like Zenyatta's Harmony Orbs. They wouldn't be super accelerated healing, but being able to have multiple active to help cover multiple allies would be really interesting. He could also be one of the smaller tanks, but have some extra shield health to make him harder to kill.
You know, when I was a boy, I really wanted a Symmetra rework, but my dad wouldn't get it for me. So I held my breath until I passed out and banged my head on the coffee table. The doctor thought I might have brain damage.
Dad, what's the point of this story?
I like stories.
Next up, let's talk a bit more about the story. I'm a lore junkie for Overwatch. It's one of my favorite parts of the brand, and its potential has frankly been squandered by mismanagement for so long. Yes, the full story experience that was intended wasn't going to happen, but if we could get a batch of missions twice a year, even if it's just 2 each season they're available, or 1 per season but we get 1 every new season, that'd be acceptable. But having played the first few missions, while they're fun and a nice challenge on harder difficulties, I think there are things that could be improved. For example, giving each character some slight buffs like extra HP or quicker cooldowns during story missions wouldn't be the end of the world. Bots don't complain about unfair health numbers, and since they already don't have to aim and can single out and try to kill a healer first, it would be nice to cut down on the BS deaths players end up having by getting unlucky spawn points or happening to make a mistake that shouldn't have cost them as much as it actually did. Other games, like roguelikes, do offer extra perks on harder difficulties. It is 100% possible to balance around. The other change I'd like to see is sort of a replacement for the Hero Talents mode we were promised, but shouldn't provide even remotely half the work required to make that happen. You could implement this in side missions or as alternate takes on the canon missions, but allowing your team to essentially pick up credits for every bot you scrap, and then allowing them to spend them at stations throughout the mission, similar to TF2's Man vs. Machine mode, would provide for additional replayability, as you could pick and choose your own stats to maximize. Want more health or shorter cooldowns? Want some buffs on low health instead? How about health on kill? Or increased movement speed? A bigger clip size, longer ability durations. The sky's the limit without having to make new animations or voice lines or code in different abilities. It's just tweaking some numbers. It'd give customers more bang for their buck, and you could even just let it work in normal missions. The lineup of characters you choose technically isn't canon, so having NPCs or shop stations littered around wouldn't break the illusion. Of course, Overwatch isn't the only faction in the lore, and I think that they should definitely take advantage of that as well. Have missions with Talon operatives. Just add in a few more Talon members to each category to make it work. Null Sector missions with reskins of Ana, Cass, Kiriko, etc. as healer units. You could even give a lore reason, such as, well, Talon scanning the files of Overwatch operatives and started uploading combat data to new Null Sector units. And of course, the heroes of Junkertown, like Queen, Junkrat, Wrecking Ball, and Roadhog. Well, we'd need another Junker specialist, and at least one Junker healer, but at the rate they're pumping out heroes, they could totally do it. Heck, this would be a great way to promote new heroes as they join the game, and if they're going to insist on this stupid method of putting heroes in the Battle Pass, this would at least be a nice way to test them out before you commit to the buy.
Yeah, that's one fine-looking barbecue pit. Why doesn't mine look like that? Ah!
The last thing I want to bring up in this video is the lackluster amount of creativity when it comes to new seasonal modes. While modes like Battle for Olympus and May's Snowball Offensive can be fun, they've been recycled ad nauseum, and very rarely ever add anything new to the table. In stark contrast, the community in and of itself have decided to pull a Thanos and do it themselves. They take this FPS and turn it into something completely different with custom modes, like Bastion Escape, Rhinecart, 12 Hooks 1 Hole, Tiny Rhines, Sleep and Yeet, and more. It's a crazy idea, I know, but maybe we could start having a featured workshop selection in the arcade each week to provide a constantly refreshing set of fun new side modes and give back to the community who keep the game alive. Offer challenges to earn lower tier cosmetics or currency for playing these sillier modes. Heck, let's even go crazier. In TF2 for a while, there was a mode inspired by the WarioWare games, where it would change every 30-ish seconds to a new minigame with custom rules. We could do something like that here. Have a minigame where you've got 30 seconds to do a Bastion Escape route to a shorter finish line, then switch to 30 seconds where everyone changes to Roadhog and competes for the highest amount of environmental kills on Ilios Well, then 30 seconds of Rhinecart, and so on and so forth. I realize that might be a nightmare to program, but if it can be done by amateurs with TF2's spaghetti coding, professionals surely can do it. But even then, just giving more of an incentive to play custom games would be really cool and a great way to celebrate exceptional talent in the community. In case it wasn't obvious, I genuinely do love and have a deep passion for Overwatch, one that carries with it a painful stigma as I watch it crash and burn in its reputation. And yet, the player base does remain. But if they want to maintain that player base, they're going to have to make changes. Yes, we all want them to lower prices in the shop, but that's just a band-aid for some of the more pressing issues plaguing the game. Do I necessarily think that these changes would save the game? No, I don't. But I also don't think the game needs saving so much as it needs new focus. More approachable and unique options, new heroes that cover more pieces of the lore, and a focus on keeping the casual audience happy would do wonders for this diamond in the rough. It's got flaws, but I genuinely want nothing more than to bring Overwatch back into the limelight as a universally praised experience. Turn it from the lowest rated Steam game into the titan it was before and could be again. Not to mention, with fairer prices in the shop, more content, and a fix towards problematic heroes, it would start raking in cash like never before. Everybody wins. My name has been Gigi, the Nerd Incarnate, and I'd like to hear from you. Would any of these suggestions make you like Overwatch 2 more? Or would you hate these changes? What would you change to improve the game? Or do you think it's perfect just as it is? I'd love to hear from you down in the comments, and if you like what I have to say, I'd really appreciate a like and a share with your fellow Overwatch fans. Thanks for tuning in today, and have yourself an incredible day. Peace out.